Police say that sometime between 9 last night and early this morning, the Bennett family was brutally attacked with a blunt instrument and a knife, probably this one found in the snow covering their front lawn. Dead are 27-year-old Bruce Bennett, his 26-year-old wife Debra, and one of their two daughters, 8-year-old Melissa. She and her mother were found in their bedrooms. A coroner says at least one of them, Melissa, appears to have been sexually assaulted. Bruce Bennett was found lying near a stairwell. Police say all of them were wearing their sleeping clothes.
The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
The phone inside the house on Center Drive had been ringing for hours. Outside, the Colorado wind of January 1984 was bitter, freezing the breath of Connie Bennett as she stood on the front porch. She had keys in her hand. She didn't want to use them. There was a quietness coming from inside the home, the kind of absolute stillness that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up before you even know why. Her son, Bruce, was supposed to be at work. Her daughter-in-law, Debra, was usually up with the kids by now. Connie pushed the key into the lock. The door swung open. In the silence of that suburban living room, the first thing she saw was her 3-year-old granddaughter, Vanessa. The little girl was wandering the hallway, her face severely injured, clutching a stuffed animal, mumbling words that made no sense. And Connie was about to become the last person in Aurora who didn't know that a monster had spent the night in her family's home. You're listening to the Black Docket. If you're new here, consider following the show and turning on notifications. We dive deep into the coldest corners of criminal history, bringing the dark details of forgotten investigations back into the light. This case is one of those stories. To understand the terror that paralyzed the Denver metro area in the opening weeks of 1984, we have to look past the dry language of police reports and focus on the families who were living there. This wasn't about high-profile targets, organized crime, or drug deals gone wrong. This was a tragedy of absolute randomness. The people who were attacked were chosen simply because they were home, sleeping in their own beds, believing that the walls and doors of their quiet suburban neighborhoods were enough to keep the outside world away. Let's start with the Bennett family. Bruce Bennett was only 27 years old. He was a proud Navy veteran, a man who carried himself with a quiet strength, focused on building a secure, peaceful life for his young family. His wife, Debra, was 26, a warm and vibrant mother whose world revolved around their two daughters, Melissa, the older child, just shy of 8, and 3-year-old Vanessa. They lived in a comfortable split-level home on East Center Drive in Aurora, Colorado. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids rode their bikes in the street until dusk, and parents sometimes left their garage doors a bit open on winter evenings without a second thought. On the evening of January 15, 1984, the temperature plummeted well below freezing. The sky turned a heavy, bruised purple as a classic Colorado winter settled in. Inside the Bennett home, the family was winding down from a normal Sunday. In 2 days, Melissa was going to turn 8. The family had already begun planning her small birthday party, talking about cake and presents before the girls were tucked into their beds. Bruce and Debra eventually retired to their own room, turning off the lights and letting the quiet dark of the winter night wrap around the house. They didn't know that a shadow was already drifting through the neighborhood. The intruder did not need to break a window. He didn't need to pry open a deadbolt. Walking along the side of the house, he found the garage door left partially open, just enough for a slender man to slide underneath. He stepped out of the freezing wind and into the dark, silent warmth of the house. Once inside, he didn't go looking for a television or a jewelry box. Instead, he searched for a tool. He found a standard claw hammer. What followed over the next stretch of time inside that house remains one of the most brutal, senseless acts of violence in Colorado history. Bruce Bennett was awakened by some sound in the dark. Maybe footsteps, maybe the creak of a floorboard that had never seemed loud on any other night. He met the intruder near the top of the stairs or in the hallway. The exact spot is still debated. What isn't debated is this: unarmed, caught completely off guard, and facing an attacker carrying a hammer in the dark, Bruce fought back. Investigators later found evidence of a chaotic struggle that spilled across the hallway and into the bedrooms. The wooden spindles of the stairway banister were broken and splintered. Blood patterns stained the walls and carpet, telling the story of a man who tried, again and again, to get back to his feet and push the attacker away from his family. But the blunt force of that hammer was too much. Bruce was eventually overcome, his injuries catastrophic. From there, the killer turned his attention to Debra, trapped in the master bedroom, and to the two little girls sleeping down the hall. Out of respect for the surviving family members, we're not going to go into graphic detail about what happened inside those bedrooms. What we can say is that the scene left behind was so horrific that veteran homicide detectives who arrived later were visibly shaken. Bruce and Debra were dead. Melissa, days away from her 8th birthday, was also dead. The only survivor was 3-year-old Vanessa. She was found in her bed, barely alive. She had a crushed jaw, a fractured skull, and severe internal injuries. Her body temperature had dropped from the cold air moving through the house. Her pajamas had been cut away. Against every medical probability, she was still breathing. The killer walked back out into the winter night, disappearing from the quiet cul-de-sac. The weapon he used was gone. He took it with him. When Connie Bennett entered the house the next morning after her phone calls went unanswered, the shock hit so hard that later, when she called 911, she couldn't even remember the address. She had to run outside into the snow, read the house numbers off the curb, and run back inside to give them to the dispatcher. When the first officers arrived on Center Drive, they found Connie so hysterical and traumatized that they had to physically lead her out of the home and sit her in the back of a patrol car while they secured the scene. At first, Aurora police treated the murders as an isolated, though exceptionally brutal, home invasion. Officers looked for footprints in the snow. Any tracks around the house had already been softened by wind and drifting. They dusted the broken banister, the door frames, and the bedrooms for fingerprints, but found nothing usable. There was blood everywhere. But in 1984, blood only told you so much. It could be typed A, B, AB, or O, but DNA profiling as we know it today was still largely a theory. A case like this would live or die on eyewitnesses, fingerprints, and confessions. None of those were coming. As the days went by, investigators started talking with neighboring departments, and a terrifying pattern began to emerge. This didn't look like a one-off tragedy. Someone was stalking the suburbs around Denver. Just 6 days before the Bennett family was attacked, on January 10, 1984, a 50-year-old woman named Patricia Louise Smith was found dead inside her townhouse in Lakewood. Patricia was family-oriented, sharing her home with her daughter and grandchildren. That afternoon, she'd come home from errands, carrying a bag of fast food. She sat down at her table. While she ate, someone came through the unlocked door. The intruder sexually assaulted her and struck her in the head repeatedly with a hammer. When he was finished, he covered her body with bedding, left the bloody hammer at the scene, and scattered the contents of her purse nearby before he walked out. When her family returned home, they walked into something that would reshape every memory they had of that house. And the pattern didn't stop there. Investigators began looking further back. On January 4th, an Aurora couple, Jim and Kim Haubenschild, were asleep when a man slipped into their home. Without warning, he started hitting them with a hammer as they lay in bed. Jim suffered a severe skull fracture. Kim sustained a major concussion. But together, they fought back hard enough to drive him out of the house. They survived, but they never went back to the kind of sleep they'd known before that night. 5 days after that, on the night of January 9, a flight attendant named Donna was getting out of her car in her garage on South Eagle Circle in Aurora. A figure stepped out from the shadows, beat her with a hammer, and sexually assaulted her before leaving her for dead. She survived, but the trauma was so severe she couldn't remember her attacker or the details of the assault. 4 brutal attacks in just under 2 weeks. 2 dead, others left with permanent injuries. The weapon was always a hammer. The settings were always middle-class homes in quiet neighborhoods, faces covered, lower bodies exposed or unclothed, bedding pulled over victims before the attacker left. Panic spread through the Denver metro area. Hardware stores ran out of deadbolts and window locks. People started sleeping with shotguns and baseball bats within reach, keeping porch lights and hallway lights on all night. Every noise outside became a possible threat. A multi-jurisdictional task force formed, but the man they were looking for might as well have been a ghost. And then, just as suddenly as the terror began, the hammer attacks stopped. February came and went. Winter turned to spring. The snow melted. The killer did not strike again in Colorado. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air, leaving behind broken families and a mystery that would hang over the state for decades. 34 years passed. For Vanessa Bennett, those 34 years meant growing up with physical scars and deep emotional ones. Reconstructive surgeries, chronic pain, and that constant gnawing question, who did this? Why my family? While those questions lived in the background of her life, something else was happening quietly in the background of law enforcement. Forensic science was changing. In the late 1980s, detectives began to realize that the biological evidence preserved from these scenes might be more valuable in the future than it was when they collected it. In 1989, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation recommended that a blood-stained comforter from the Bennett home be carefully preserved for possible DNA testing. By 1990, technicians had managed to pull a partial DNA profile from semen on that comforter. It wasn't enough yet to run through any large system. In 2001, with better technology, scientists extracted a full male DNA profile from the Bennett evidence and entered it into CODIS, the National DNA Database. They ran the search. No match. Whoever had done this either had not been convicted of a qualifying felony, or his DNA simply wasn't in the system. Years later, investigators did something different. Instead of asking, "Who is this?" they asked, "Is this the same man?" Advanced testing compared the DNA from the Bennett house with DNA recovered from Patricia Smith's body in Lakewood. It was a perfect match. The same man had murdered Patricia Smith and the Bennett family. The hammer killer wasn't a theory anymore. He was a specific, unknown individual whose genetic fingerprint now existed in a database with no name attached. In 2016, still desperate for leads, investigators commissioned a DNA-based composite, a phenotyping sketch predicting what the killer might have looked like in his 20s and what he might look like in his 50s. The images hit the local news cycle. No solid tips followed. It looked like this case might stay unsolved forever. And then came 2018. By that point, many states had started collecting DNA, not only from new offenders, but retroactively from inmates who'd been locked up long before DNA collection became standard. In Nevada, a long-term inmate serving a 110-year sentence had his cheek swabbed. His DNA profile was uploaded to CODIS like thousands of others. On July 9, 2018, a computer in Colorado pinged. The DNA from the 1984 hammer murders matched that Nevada inmate. His name was Alex Christopher Ewing. When detectives dug into Ewing's history, they discovered a life that slotted into the 1984 timeline with disturbing precision. Born in North Carolina in 1960, a high school dropout, petty crimes, arrests for burglary and theft in multiple states. By the summer of 1983, he was in Colorado with a state driver's license and a Denver area address. He was 23 years old, working odd jobs, drifting between places, when the hammer attacks began. So why did the attacks stop after the Bennett murders? Because Ewing left Colorado and immediately carried his violence somewhere else. On January 27, 1984, 12 days after the Bennetts were killed, a man in Kingman, Arizona, was attacked in his sleep and struck repeatedly in the head with a 25-pound slab of granite. He survived, but barely. Later that morning, an officer noticed a suspicious man near an interstate on ramp. When the officer tried to talk to him, the man ran. After a long foot chase through the desert, police tackled and arrested him. His name was Alex Ewing. He was charged with attempted murder and burglary. Because of jail overcrowding, he was moved to a facility in Utah to await trial. On August 9, 1984, during a transport back to Arizona, the van stopped in Kingman. Somehow, still in restraints, Ewing managed to escape on foot. For 2 days, law enforcement combed the desert. Ewing walked. He made it to Henderson, Nevada. On the night of August 11th, he broke into another home, armed himself with an axe handle, and beat a sleeping couple in their bed. They survived. 2 days later, he was arrested again. This time, a Nevada jury convicted him of attempted murder and burglary, and a judge handed down a 110-year sentence. From August 1984 onward, Ewing sat in a Nevada prison. From Colorado's point of view, the hammer attacks had simply stopped. It took 34 years and a cheek swab in another state's prison to finally connect that inmate number with the unknown DNA profile sitting on a shelf in Colorado. When Colorado detectives traveled to Nevada in 2018 to talk to Ewing, he denied any role in the murders. He fought extradition for nearly 2 years, appealing through multiple courts. Eventually, every appeal failed. In February 2020, surrounded by guards, Alex Christopher Ewing was flown back to Colorado to stand trial. The Bennett family trial began in July 2021 in Arapahoe County. The courtroom filled with family members, retired detectives, and journalists who had been living with this case in one way or another for most of their lives. One of the most emotional moments came when Connie Bennett, now in her late 80s, took the stand. She described the morning she walked into her son's home and found her world destroyed. When asked if she recognized the man at the defense table, she said no. He was still a stranger. The defense argued that the DNA evidence might have been contaminated over the decades. They pointed to the fact that evidence collection in 1984 didn't follow the same standards as modern labs. They reminded the jury that no usable fingerprints at the scene had been matched to Ewing. The prosecution answered with science and with math. A DNA expert explained that the odds of the Bennett and Smith crime scene DNA belonging to someone other than Ewing were around 1 in 3 nonillion. That's a 3 with 30 zeros after it, a number so large that comparing it to sand grains on Earth barely scratches the surface. In human terms, it meant this. For all practical purposes, it was him. On August 6, 2021, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts, including multiple counts of first-degree murder and sexual assault. Ewing was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, 1 for Bruce, 1 for Debra, and 1 for Melissa. Less than a year later, in April 2022, he was tried again in Jefferson County for the murder of Patricia Smith. Another jury, another set of instructions. The same DNA, the same conclusion. Guilty. Another life sentence. For almost 4 decades, the man responsible for these attacks had lived as just another inmate in Nevada, believing, as far as we know, that the worst things he'd done were buried in another state's past. What he didn't account for was that every drop of blood, every trace of biological material he left behind in 1984 had become a kind of permanent signature, waiting for technology and policy to catch up. The lock on the door finally held. I'm Richard, and this has been the Black Docket. If this deep dive into one of Colorado's most haunting cold cases meant something to you, consider following the podcast, leaving a rating, or sharing it with someone who also lives in the true crime rabbit hole. And tonight, when you walk through your own front door, maybe give that lock an extra check, not out of fear, but in recognition of how much of our safety has always depended on things we barely think about. Sleep well, and I'll see you on the next case.